Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The welding torch hissed as Cullen Harwood guided the metal seam with steady hands. Sparks cascaded around his mask, but his focus never wavered. At 39, he'd found peace in the precision of his work. Metal didn't lie, didn't manipulate, didn't break promises. Nice work, Mr. Harwood. Jake Martinez, one of his better students, lifted his own mask. That joint looks solid. Cullen nodded, setting down his torch. Metal tells you what it needs. You just have to listen. The afternoon sun slanted through the workshop windows of Bozeman Trade School. Students packed their gear, eager for the weekend. Cullen cleaned his station methodically, the same routine he'd followed for 3 years since the divorce. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. Court denied motion to review custody. Sorry, Cullen. He stared at the message. 3 years of legal battles, and Wyatt still lived with Rhett and her mother Verna. The temporary custody arrangement had become permanent through a maze of paperwork and legal maneuvers he couldn't afford to challenge. You heading out? Jake asked. Yeah. Cullen pocketed his phone. See you Monday. The drive to his apartment took 20 minutes through Bozeman's quiet streets. His place was small, clean, functional. A couch, a kitchen table, a bedroom he'd set up for Wyatt's weekend visits that came less and less often. Cullen opened a refrigerator and grabbed a beer. The silence pressed against him. He'd grown used to it, but weekends still felt empty. Wyatt was supposed to come tomorrow, but Rhett had canceled again. Some excuse about the boy having a cold. His ex-wife's voice echoed in his memory from their last phone conversation. You're just not equipped for this, Cullen. Wyatt needs stability, not some blue-collar fantasy. Blue-collar fantasy. As if teaching kids honest work was something to be ashamed of. Cullen sat on his couch and opened his laptop. The custody papers sat in a folder on his desktop, reviewed countless times. Every document seemed legitimate, every signature in order. But something felt wrong. The way Rhett's mother, Verna McAllister, had appeared at every hearing with her expensive suit and practiced smile. The way she'd whisper to Rhett's lawyer before each session. The McAllisters had money, influence, connections. Verna ran a successful consulting firm, lived in a house worth more than Cullen would make in 5 years. When Rhett had filed for divorce, claiming irreconcilable differences, Verna had swooped in with the best family lawyer in the state. Temporary custody, they'd said, until things settled down. That was 3 years ago. Cullen's phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Cullen? It's Tom Bradley. From the hospital. Tom was a nurse in the pediatric ward, someone Cullen had met during Wyatt's emergency room visit last year. The boy had supposedly fallen downstairs at Verna's house. What's up, Tom? Listen, I probably shouldn't be calling, but your boy was here again yesterday. Emergency room. Cullen's grip tightened on the phone. What happened? They said he fell off his bike. Dehydration, some bruising. The grandmother was with him. How bad? Bad enough to keep him overnight. But here's the thing, the kid seemed scared. Real scared. Kept asking for his dad. Cullen's jaw clenched. Did you tell them that? I tried. But the grandmother had all the paperwork. Legal guardian stuff. She was real quick to shut down any talk about calling you. Where's he now? Discharged this morning. But Cullen, something's not right. I've been doing this for 15 years. That kid's not just clumsy. The line went quiet. Cullen stared at his reflection in the laptop screen. Thanks for calling, Tom. Yeah, just keep an eye out, you know. Cullen hung up and sat in the growing darkness. Another accident. Another trip to the hospital without his knowledge. Another reminder that he had no legal rights to his own son, but he pulled up his contacts and found his lawyer's number. The call went to voicemail. Jim, it's Cullen. Wyatt was in the hospital again. We need to talk about emergency custody. Call me back. But even as he left the message, Cullen knew it was pointless. The McAllisters had built their legal fortress too well. Every time he challenged them, new documents appeared. New testimony from witnesses he'd never met. New evidence that painted him as unstable, unreliable, unfit. That he walked to Wyatt's room and stood in the doorway. The single bed was made with military precision. Toy trucks lined the shelf, waiting for a boy who came less and less often. The last time Wyatt had visited, He'd been quiet, withdrawn. When Cullen asked about school, about friends, about anything, the boy gave short answers and stared at his hands. "I'm tired, Dad," Wyatt had said when Cullen suggested they go fishing. "Can we just watch TV?" 9 years old and already beaten down. Cullen had wanted to press, to ask what was wrong, but the boy seemed so fragile, so different from the laughing kid who used to help him build model planes. Now Cullen wondered if he'd missed something, if his son was trying to tell him something without words. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closer. Cullen grabbed his keys and headed for the door. He needed air, space, time to think. The night was cool, autumn settling over Montana like a familiar blanket. Cullen drove without direction, letting instinct guide him through empty streets. He found himself parked outside Rhett's house, Verna's house. Technically, the place where his son lived, and he was no longer welcome. The windows were dark. A for sale sign sat in the front yard. For sale? Since when? Cullen pulled out his phone and called information. McAllister Residence in Bozeman. "I'm sorry, that number has been disconnected." A cold weight settled in his stomach. He drove home in silence, his mind racing. If they were selling the house, where was Wyatt? Where are they going? His phone had 2 missed calls from an unknown number. The voicemail was cheerful, almost singing. "Cullen, it's Verna. Hope you're well. Listen, Rhett and I are in Portland for the weekend, and we forgot to arrange care for our dog. Could you swing by and feed him? The spare key is under the garden gnome. Thanks so much." Cullen played the message again. Dog? They'd never owned a dog. In all the years he'd known Rhett, she'd claimed to be allergic to pets, that he called the number back. Straight to voicemail. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold. Cullen had barely slept, the strange voicemail playing on repeat in his mind. He called Rhett's old number again, still disconnected. He tried Verna's office line and got an automated message about being closed for renovation. By noon. He couldn't stand it anymore. He drove to the McAllister house, parked across the street, and watched. No movement in the windows. No cars in the driveway. The for sale sign swayed in the breeze. Cullen walked to the front door and knocked. No answer. He tried the doorbell, then knocked harder. Nothing. The garden gnome sat by the front steps, a ridiculous ceramic figure with a painted smile. Cullen lifted it and found a key underneath. His hand shook as he turned it in the lock. "Hello," he called into the empty house. "Verna? Rhett." The silence felt heavy, oppressive. Furniture was covered with sheets. Boxes sat stacked in the hallway. The air smelled stale, like a house that had been empty for days. "Here, dog," he called, feeling ridiculous. "Where are you, boy?" No sound of paws on hardwood. No bark or whine. Cullen walked through the living room, the kitchen, the dining room. All empty. All wrong. This wasn't a house where people lived. It was a house being abandoned. A smell hit him as he reached the hallway. Sour, organic, wrong. It came from a direction of the laundry room. The laundry room door was closed, and something was wedged against it. A chair. As if someone had barricaded it from the outside. Cullen's heart hammered as he moved the chair aside. The smell grew stronger. He twisted the handle locked. "Wyatt." He pressed his ear to the door. "Wyatt, are you in there?" A sound. Faint, like a whisper or a moan. Cullen threw his shoulder against the door. It held. He stepped back and kicked hard, then again. The frame splintered and the door swung open. The smell hit him like a physical blow. Ammonia, vomit, human waste. And underneath it all, the sweet, sick smell of someone slowly dying. The laundry room was dark, the single window painted over. Cullen fumbled for the light switch, his hand shaking. The bare bulb flickered to life. Wyatt lay on a thin mat in the corner, curled into a ball. His clothes were stained, torn. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp under pale skin. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his lips were cracked from dehydration. "Oh, God!" Cullen dropped to his knees beside his son. "Wyatt, Wyatt, can you hear me?" The boy's eyes fluttered open. They were dull, unfocused. "Dad, I'm here. I'm here, son." Wyatt tried to sit up and fell back. Am I in trouble?" No, you're not in trouble." Cullen's voice cracked. He looked around the room, his vision blurring with rage that a metal bowl sat next to the mat. The word dog was painted on the side in cheerful red letters. Inside were crumbs of dry cereal and a thin layer of water that smelled like it had been sitting for days that a bucket in the corner served as a toilet. The smell was overwhelming. Restraints hung from hooks in the wall. Leather straps, the kind used for training animals. "How long?" Cullen whispered. "How long have you been in here?" "I don't know." Wyatt's voice was barely audible. They said you didn't want me anymore." "That's not true. That's never been true." Cullen pulled out his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "I need an ambulance." "My son." Someone locked him in a room. "He's barely conscious." "What's your location?" Cullen gave the address, his voice steady despite the fury building inside him. He sat on the floor and pulled Wyatt into his lap. The boy weighed nothing, skin and bones wrapped in filthy clothes. "They said I was a bad boy," Wyatt whispered. "They said I had to stay until I learned to be good." "You're not bad. You're perfect." Cullen smoothed his son's hair. "You're perfect, and this is never going to happen again." The paramedics arrived within minutes. They worked quickly, professionally, asking questions Cullen answered through gritted teeth. How long had the boy been like this? What had he eaten? When was the last time he'd seen a doctor? "Another day," one of them said quietly, "and we might not have made it in time." At the hospital, Cullen sat in the waiting room while doctors examined Wyatt. Nurses came and went, their faces grim. A social worker appeared, asking questions about custody arrangements and living situations. "I'm his father," Cullen said for the third time. "I have visitation rights." "We understand. But the current guardianship paperwork shows." "I don't care what the paperwork shows." They locked him in a room and starved him. The social worker made notes. "We'll need to investigate the living situation. Child Protective Services will be involved." Dr. Reynolds, the attending physician, found Cullen in the hallway. "Your son is stable," she said. "Severely malnourished, dehydrated, showing signs of psychological trauma. We're going to keep him for observation." "How bad?" "Bad enough. Whoever did this, they were systematic about it. This wasn't neglect, it was deliberate." Cullen's hands clenched into fists. "When can I see him?" "He's sleeping now. We've given him fluids and a mild sedative. You can sit with him if you'd like." Wyatt looked even smaller in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors. His breathing was steady but shallow. Cullen took the chair beside the bed and watched his son's chest rise and fall. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Heard about the emergency. So sorry. Kids can be so dramatic." V. Cullen stared at the message. Dramatic, as if Wyatt had staged his own imprisonment. He turned off the phone and sat in the quiet room. The steady beep of monitors marked time. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the walls orange and red. Cullen thought about the locked door, the painted window, the bowl-marked dog. He thought about Verna's cheerful voicemail, about Rhett's constant cancellations of visits, about 3 years of legal battles that had isolated him from his son. This hadn't been neglect. It had been calculated, planned, executed with precision. And now it was over. He looked at Wyatt's sleeping face and made a promise he intended to keep. "I'm going to bury them both," he said quietly to the empty room. But legally, Monday morning, Cullen sat across from Daria Ricks in her downtown office. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a direct manner that cut through pleasantries. "I've reviewed the hospital records," she said, spreading papers across her desk. "This is bad, Cullen. Really bad. Bad enough for criminal charges. Bad enough for a lot of things. But let's be smart about this." She leaned back in her chair. "You want custody of Wyatt. That's the priority. That's the appetizer," Cullen said. "I want prison time." Daria raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "They didn't do this on impulse. This was planned. Systematic. They locked my son in a room and starved him, and they made sure I couldn't stop it." His voice was flat, controlled. "I want them prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Criminal charges are harder to prove than family court matters. Then we prove both." Daria studied him for a long moment. "You're not looking for revenge. You're looking for justice. I'm looking for insurance. As long as they're free, they're a threat to Wyatt." She nodded slowly. "All right, but we do this methodically. Family court first, establish custody, and get a restraining order. Then we build the criminal case. What do we need? Everything. Hospital records, CPS reports, medical evaluations. We need to establish a pattern of abuse and document every lie they've told. Cullen pulled out a folder. I've been keeping records. Every canceled visit, every excuse, every time they claimed Wyatt was sick or injured. Daria flipped through the papers. This is good. Really good. You've been documenting for 3 years. Something felt wrong from the beginning. I just didn't know how wrong. Where are Rhett and Verna now? I don't know. Their house is for sale. Phones are disconnected. They're in the wind. We'll find them. In the meantime, we file for emergency custody. With Wyatt in the hospital and evidence of abuse, we should get a temporary order. How temporary? Depends on what else we find. Tell me about the custody arrangement. How did you lose primary custody in the first place? Cullen's jaw tightened. Rhett filed for divorce, claimed I was unstable. Her mother backed her up, brought in witnesses who said I drank too much, yelled at Wyatt, made him nervous. Any truth to that? No. I had a beer after work sometimes. I never yelled at my son. He paused. I raised my voice to Rhett a few times during the divorce. About money, about seeing Wyatt. But never at him. Who were the witnesses? Neighbors, mostly. People I barely knew. They all had similar stories about hearing arguments, seeing Wyatt crying after I dropped him off. Sounds coordinated. It was. Every hearing, Verna would show up with new evidence. New testimony. New reasons why I shouldn't have custody. Daria made notes. We'll need to revisit all of that. But first, let's focus on the current situation. I'm filing for emergency custody today. We'll also request a restraining order preventing Rhett and Verna from contacting Wyatt. What about criminal charges? We'll start with endangerment and custodial interference. As we gather more evidence, we can add charges. Child abuse, conspiracy, fraud if we can prove they falsified documents. Cullen nodded. What do you need from me? Access to everything. Wyatt's medical records, school records, any documentation of the living situation. I also want to interview Wyatt when he's ready. He's scared, traumatized. They convinced him I didn't want him. We'll be gentle, but his testimony will be crucial. They spent the next hour going through documents and planning strategy. Daria was thorough, methodical, asking pointed questions about dates, times, conversations. One more thing, she said as they finished. If we're going to make criminal charges stick, we need to find them first. Do you have any idea where they might go? Verna has a sister in Seattle. Rhett mentioned visiting her before. We'll start there. In the meantime, I'll get the emergency custody order and restraining order filed. You stay close to Wyatt and document everything. Cullen stood to leave. How long will this take? Depends on what we find. But Cullen, she met his eyes. This isn't going to be easy. They're going to fight back, and they're going to fight dirty. Good, he said. I'm counting on it. The next morning, Cullen returned to the hospital with a briefcase full of legal documents. The emergency custody order had been granted, and Wyatt was now legally under his care. The restraining order was in effect, preventing Rhett and Verna from coming within 500 feet of the boy doctor. Reynolds met him at the nurse's station. He's doing better. Physically, anyway. We got his blood sugar stabilized, and he's keeping food down. What about psychologically? That's going to take time. He's been asking for you, though. That's a good sign. Cullen found Wyatt sitting up in bed, picking at a bowl of oatmeal. The boy looked up when he entered, and something like relief crossed his face. Dad! Hey, son. Cullen sat in the chair beside the bed. How are you feeling? Better. The nurse said I can have ice cream later. That's good. Real good. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Wyatt ate slowly, methodically, as if afraid the food might be taken away. Dad? Are they coming back? No. They're not allowed to come near you anymore. Promise? I promise. Wyatt nodded and returned to his oatmeal. Cullen watched him eat, noting the careful way he portioned each bite, the way he looked toward the door every few minutes. Wyatt, I need to ask you some questions. About what happened. Is that okay? The boy stiffened. Am I in trouble? No, you're not in trouble. You'll never be in trouble for telling the truth. Grandma Verna said I shouldn't talk about private family things. This isn't private anymore. And it's not family business. What they did to you was wrong, and we need to make sure it never happens again. Wyatt set down his spoon. How long was I in there? We don't know yet. Can you remember? It was dark most of the time. They only turned on the light when they brought food. How often was that? I don't know. Sometimes a long time. Sometimes I thought they forgot about me. Cullen's hands clenched, but he kept his voice steady. What did they tell you about me? That you didn't want me anymore. That you were busy with your new life. Wyatt's voice was small. That if I was a good boy and learned to be quiet, maybe you'd visit someday. That's not true. I've been trying to see you for months. They kept making excuses. Really? Really? I called. I wrote letters. I went to court. They wouldn't let me see you. Wyatt absorbed this information quietly. I wrote you letters too. In my head. When it was dark. What did they say? That I missed you. That I was sorry for being bad. That I wanted to come home. Cullen had to look away. You were never bad. And you were coming home. A social worker appeared in the doorway. Janet Mills, the same woman who had interviewed Cullen at the hospital. Mr. Harwood? Could we speak privately? They moved to a small conference room down the hall. Janet spread files across the table. I've been reviewing Wyatt's history with CPS, she said. We have 3 previous reports. 3, all filed by anonymous callers. Claims that Wyatt was being neglected, that he appeared malnourished, that he had unexplained injuries. Cullen's stomach dropped. When? The first one was 6 months ago. The second was 3 months ago. The third was last month. What happened with the investigations? They were closed after initial interviews. Mrs. McAllister provided explanations for Wyatt's appearance growth spurts, food allergies, clumsiness. The reports were deemed unfounded. But they weren't unfounded. No, they weren't. Janet's voice was grim. Someone was trying to get our attention, but we didn't dig deep enough. Who made the calls? Anonymous. But looking back, I think it might have been someone with access to the house. Someone who saw what was happening, but was afraid to come forward directly. Cullen thought about this. What about medical records? That's where it gets interesting. Wyatt has been to the emergency room 4 times in the past 6 months. Different hospitals, different doctors. Each time, Mrs. McAllister provided different explanations. What kind of explanations? Falls, accidents, illness. But when you look at the pattern, Janet pulled out hospital records. Dehydration, malnutrition, contusions consistent with restraint marks. The doctors noted concerns, but Mrs. McAllister always had plausible explanations. They were covering their tracks. Exactly. They were careful to spread the visits across multiple hospitals so no single doctor would see the full picture. Cullen reviewed the records. Each report painted a picture of a child in distress. But the explanations provided by Verna McAllister had been accepted without question. What about school records? Wyatt was withdrawn from public school 3 months ago. Mrs. McAllister filed paperwork for homeschooling 3 months ago, right when the second CPS report was filed. It fits the timeline. They were isolating him, cutting off his contact with potential witnesses. Cullen felt the pieces clicking into place. This wasn't random abuse. This was a systematic campaign to break him down. That's what I think too. And Mr. Harwood? There's something else. Janet pulled out another file. I've been reviewing the original custody case. Some of the documentation doesn't add up. What do you mean? Witness statements that appear to be written by the same person. Medical reports from a pediatrician who lost his license 2 years ago. Character references from people who claim to have known your family, but have no record of ever living in Montana. Cullen's pulse quickened. They forged evidence. I can't prove it yet, but there are enough inconsistencies to warrant investigation. What happens now? We're opening a full investigation into the custody case and the abuse allegations. In the meantime, Wyatt stays with you. That's not negotiable. They returned to Wyatt's room. The boy was sleeping, finally peaceful. Cullen sat beside the bed and watched him breathe. His phone buzzed. A text from Daria. Found something. Meet me at the office tomorrow. Bring everything. The next evening, Cullen met Daria at her office. She called in a favor from Jordy Peck, a former cyberforensics specialist who now worked as a private investigator. Tell him what you found, Daria said. Jordy was a wiry man in his 40s, with the intense focus of someone who lived in digital worlds. He'd brought Rhett's laptop, Recovered from the house before the sale went through. Your ex-wife wasn't very good at computer security, he said, opening the laptop. She thought deleting files made them disappear. What did you recover? Email correspondence between Rhett and her mother. Text messages. Financial records. And this. He pulled up a folder labeled Custody Strategy. Cullen felt his blood freeze. Strategy? Take a look. The folder contained dozens of documents. Medical reports, witness statements, financial records, and a detailed timeline labeled Cullen Custody Elimination Plan. They planned this, Cullen said, scanning the documents. All of it. From the beginning, Jordy confirmed. The divorce, the custody battle, the isolation. They built a case against you piece by piece. Daria pulled up an email thread. Look at this. From 8 months ago. From Rhett McAllister to Verna McAllister subject. Phase 2 mom. The court visits are getting too frequent. We need to accelerate the timeline. Dr. Everett said he can provide additional medical documentation if needed. From Verna McAllister to Rhett McAllister E. Phase 2 agreed. I'll handle the witness statements. We need to make sure Cullen looks unstable at the next hearing. The CPS contact is ready to file reports if necessary. Cullen read the exchange twice. CPS contact. Keep reading, Jordy said. More emails detailed the strategy. False witness statements were coordinated. Dr. Lance Everett, a pediatrician who had lost his license, provided falsified medical reports claiming Wyatt had behavioral disorders and injuries consistent with parental abuse. This is conspiracy, Darius said. Fraud. Perjury. They built an entire false case against you. But why? Cullen asked. Why go to all this trouble? Jordy pulled up another document. Insurance money. Verna took out a life insurance policy on Wyatt 6 months ago. $500,000. The room went silent. She was going to kill him, Cullen said quietly. The medical records support that theory, Darius said. Systematic starvation, isolation, psychological abuse. They were breaking him down slowly, and if he died, it would look like the result of long-term neglect or psychological issues. Issues they'd already documented in the medical files. Jordy nodded. The perfect murder. Slow, legal, profitable. Cullen stared at the screen. Show me the rest. The emails revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Verna had paid witnesses to provide false testimony. She'd bribed CPS workers to close investigations. She'd worked with Dr. Everett to create a false medical history that painted Wyatt as a troubled child and Cullen as an abusive father. Here's the smoking gun, Jordy said, pulling up another folder. Audio files from the house. Audio. They had a baby monitor system. Recorded everything. Problem is, they never turned it off. He played the first file. Verna's voice, cheerful and casual. Drink slow, Wyatt. You don't want to throw up again. Remember, you're a bad boy when Daddy's around. The second file was worse. Rhett's voice, cold and clinical. Don't eat it all today. You need to stay weak. We're almost done. Cullen closed his eyes. How long had you had this? Recovered it yesterday. The files are time-stamped. This conversation was recorded 5 days ago, while I was trying to get emergency custody, while they were in Portland, according to the voicemail you received. Daria made notes. This is everything we need for criminal charges. Conspiracy to commit murder, child abuse, fraud, perjury. What about finding them? Working on it, Jordy said. But Cullen? They're going to run. Once they realize we have this evidence, they'll disappear. Then we move fast. Already on it. I've contacted the prosecutor's office. We'll have warrants by tomorrow morning. Cullen looked at the laptop screen, at the evidence of his ex-wife's betrayal laid out in digital black and white. 3 years of legal battles. 3 years of being painted as an unfit father. 3 years of watching his son disappear into their web of lies. There's more, Jordy said quietly. Financial records show they were planning to leave the country. Tickets to Canada, then connections to Europe. They were going to wait until Wyatt died, collect the insurance money, and disappear. They thought of everything. Everything except you finding him in time. Cullen stood and walked to the window. Bozeman spread out below, quiet and peaceful. Somewhere out there, Rhett and Verna were running. but they'd left their secrets behind, recorded in digital permanence. What happens now, he asked. Now we spring the trap, Daria said, and we make sure they never hurt another child. The next morning, Cullen was feeding Wyatt breakfast when the hospital receptionist called his room. Mr. Harwood, there are some people here to see Wyatt. They say they're family. Cullen's blood chilled. Names? A Mrs. McAllister and a Ms. McAllister. They're asking about visiting hours. Tell them to wait. I'll be right down. He turned to Wyatt, who had gone pale. It's okay. Remember what we talked about? They can't hurt you anymore. But they're here. They're not allowed to see you. I'm going to make sure of that. Cullen found Rhett and Verna in the hospital lobby. They looked exactly as he remembered Rhett in her designer clothes. Verna with her practiced smile and expensive handbag. But there was something different in their eyes. Desperation. Cullen. Verna approached with her arms outstretched. Thank God you're here. We came as soon as we heard. Stay back. His voice was flat, dangerous. You're not allowed within 500 feet of my son. That's ridiculous, Rhett said. He's my son, too. Is he? Because according to the baby monitor recordings, you were more interested in keeping him weak than keeping him alive. Both women went still. Verna's smile never wavered, but her eyes hardened. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Sure you do. Don't eat it all today. You need to stay weak. We're almost done. Cullen repeated Rhett's words exactly. Ring any bells? Rhett's face went white. You're lying. Am I? How about this one? Drink slow, Wyatt. You don't want to throw up again. Remember, you're a bad boy when Daddy's around. Verna stepped forward. You're obviously under a lot of stress, Cullen. Maybe you should leave. Now, before I call security. We have rights, Rhett said, her voice rising. He's my son. You lost those rights when you locked him in a room and starved him. You can't prove anything. It's your word against ours. Cullen pulled out his phone and played one of the audio files. Rhett's voice filled the lobby. Don't eat it all today. You need to stay weak. We're almost done. Several people in the lobby turned to stare. Rhett's face went from white to red. That's taken out of context. Context. Cullen's voice was deadly quiet. What context makes it okay to starve a 9-year-old boy? Verna grabbed Rhett's arm. We should go. No. I want to see my son. I want to explain. There's nothing to explain. You locked him in a room with a dog bowl and watched him waste away. You convinced him I didn't want him while you planned to collect insurance money on his death. That's not true. The emails say otherwise. Your laptop had some interesting files, Rhett. Cullen custody elimination plan was particularly enlightening. Both women stared at him. Verna's mask finally slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. You broke into my house. I used the key you left me, remember? To feed your non-existent dog. You had no right. I had every right. He's my son, and you were killing him. Security guards approached, summoned by the commotion. Cullen showed them the restraining order. These women are prohibited from being here. They need to leave immediately. Wait, Rhett said desperately. Please, I just want to see him. I want to explain. Explain what? That you're sorry? That it was all a misunderstanding. Cullen's voice was ice. Save it for the jury. Jury, criminal charges are being filed today. Conspiracy to commit murder, child abuse, fraud. Did you really think I'd let you walk away from this? Verna straightened her shoulders. You can't prove anything. I can prove everything. Your emails, your financial records, your false witness statements. Dr. Everett is ready to testify about the medical reports you paid him to falsify. Lance wouldn't. Lance would rather testify than go to prison for conspiracy. Amazing how cooperative people become when they're facing serious charges. The security guards moved closer. Ladies, you need to leave now. This isn't over, Verna said quietly. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. Cullen watched them walk away, noting the way Verna whispered urgently to Rhett. They were planning something, regrouping, preparing for the next battle. But he was ready for them. He returned to Wyatt's room and found the boy sitting up in bed, alert and worried. Are they gone? Wyatt asked. They're gone, and they're not coming back. Promise? I promise. That afternoon, Daria called with an update. Warrants are issued. We're moving to arrest them, but they're not at their hotel. They ran. Looks like it. But Cullen? We'll find them. And when we do, they're going to prison for a very long time. 2 days later, Jordy called with news. Found them. They're in Seattle, staying with Verna's sister. Local police are moving in now. Cullen was at the hospital, helping Wyatt with physical therapy. The boy was getting stronger, but the psychological damage would take longer to heal. Dad, are you okay? Wyatt asked, noticing his father's distraction. I'm fine, son. Just thinking about Mom and Grandma, about making sure they can't hurt you anymore. Wyatt nodded solemnly. I don't want to see them again. You won't have to. Not if you don't want to. Good. They scared me. They can't scare you anymore. They can't do anything to you anymore. An hour later, Daria arrived with a folder full of documents. They're in custody. Both of them. Arrested without incident. What are the charges? Conspiracy to commit murder, child endangerment, fraud, perjury, custodial interference. The prosecutor is considering additional charges. How strong is the case? Airtight. Between the emails, the audio recordings, and the physical evidence from the house, they're going to prison. Cullen felt a weight lift from his shoulders. What happens now? Arraignment tomorrow. They'll probably plead not guilty, but their lawyers are going to push for a plea deal. No deals. Cullen, no deals. They plan to murder my son for insurance money. They don't get to negotiate their way out of this. Daria nodded. I'll convey that to the prosecutor. That evening, Cullen received a call from Janet Mills at CPS. We've completed our investigation into the original custody case, she said. We found substantial evidence of fraud. What kind of evidence? Forged documents, paid witnesses, false medical reports. The entire case against you is fabricated. Can you prove it? We already have. The original custody order is being vacated. You'll have full custody of Wyatt, retroactive to the date of the divorce. What about the 3 years I lost? We can't give you that time back, but we can make sure it never happens again. Cullen hung up and sat in the quiet hospital room. Wyatt was sleeping, finally peaceful. The machines beeped softly, monitoring his recovery. 3 years. 3 years of legal battles, of being painted as an unfit father, of watching his son disappear into their web of lies. But it was over now. The truth was out. The evidence was overwhelming, and justice was finally within reach. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You think you've won, but this isn't over. We have resources you can't imagine. V. Cullen stared at the message for a long moment, then forwarded it to Daria and the prosecutor's office. Even in custody, Verna was still trying to manipulate and threaten, but her words were empty now. The evidence was already in the system, the charges were already filed, and the wheels of justice were already turning. He deleted the message and turned off his phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new legal battles, new attempts by Rhett and Verna to escape justice. But tonight his son was safe. Tonight, the truth was finally out, and that was enough. The next morning brought unexpected news. Jordy called while Cullen was having breakfast with Wyatt in the hospital cafeteria. You need to see this, he said. I found something else on the laptop. What now? Video files from the baby monitor system. They weren't just recording audio, they were recording everything. Cullen felt his stomach drop. Everything. The abuse, the starvation, the psychological torture. It's all there, Cullen. Hours of video evidence. Can you bring it to the hospital? Already on my way. An hour later, Jordy arrived with his laptop. They found a private conference room, and he pulled up the files. I have to warn you, he said. This is hard to watch. The first video was time-stamped 5 days ago. Wyatt sat in the laundry room, the dog bowl beside him. He was thinner than Cullen remembered, his eyes hollow and desperate that Verna's voice came from off-screen. You know the rules, Wyatt. Good boys eat slowly. Bad boys don't eat at all. I'm hungry, Grandma. Of course you are. That's how you learn. Cullen watched his son ration the meager contents of the bowl, making each bite last as long as possible. The boy looked toward the camera occasionally, as if hoping someone would see, someone would help. There are dozens of these, Jordy said, going back months. The second video was worse. Rhett entered the room with a small cup of water. Wyatt reached for it eagerly, but she pulled it back. What do you say? Please, Mom. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? For being bad. For wanting to see Dad. That's right. Your father doesn't want you, Wyatt. He's too busy with his new life to care about a problem child. But I'm not a problem. Yes, you are. You're exactly the kind of problem that needs to be fixed. Cullen had to look away. Turn it off. There's more. Audio files where they discuss the insurance policy, the timeline, the plan to make it look like natural causes. I don't need to see any more. But the jury will. This is everything we need to prove premeditated murder. Daria arrived as Jordy was packing up his laptop. The arraignment is in 2 hours. Are you ready? As ready as I'll ever be. There's something else. The prosecutor wants to meet with you and Wyatt before the hearing. What? They want to explain the process, prepare him for what's coming. If this goes to trial, he'll need to testify. Cullen looked through the conference room window at his son, who was coloring at a table in the hallway. The boy seemed fragile, broken in ways that would take years to heal. He's not ready for that. We'll make sure he's ready. Child psychologists, victim advocates, whatever he needs. And if he can't do it, then we proceed with the physical evidence. But Cullen, his testimony could be the difference between conviction and acquittal. I won't put him through that if he's not ready. We'll take it slow. See how he responds to counseling, how he handles talking about what happened. They returned to the hallway where Wyatt was finishing his drawing. It was a picture of a house with 2 figures standing outside, one tall, one small. That's us, he said, showing it to Cullen. At our new house. It's perfect, son. Dad? Are Mom and Grandma going to jail? Maybe. Probably. Good. They were mean to me. They were more than mean. They were wrong, and they're going to be punished for it. Wyatt nodded and returned to his coloring. The simplicity of his understanding was both heartbreaking and hopeful. The arraignment was brief. Rhett and Verna entered pleas of not guilty through their lawyers. No bail was set. The judge deemed them flight risks, given the evidence of their planned escape to Europe. As they were led back to their cells. Verna turned to look at Cullen. Her eyes were cold, calculating, still looking for an angle to exploit, but there were no angles left. The evidence was overwhelming, the case was solid, and justice was finally within reach. Outside the courthouse, Daria reviewed the timeline. Trial is set for next month. We'll use the time to prepare Wyatt, organize our evidence, and build the strongest case possible. What are our chances? With the video evidence, the audio recordings, and the documentary evidence? I'd say we're looking at conviction on all counts. In prison time, 25 to life for conspiracy to commit murder. Additional time for the other charges. Cullen nodded. It wasn't enough. Nothing would be enough to balance the scales for what they'd done to Wyatt. But it was justice, and it was permanent. 3 weeks later, Cullen sat in the prosecutor's office with District Attorney Rebecca Walsh. The case had attracted media attention. A mother and grandmother conspiring to murder a child for insurance money was the kind of story that made headlines. The defense is going to argue that this was neglect, not attempted murder, Walsh said, reviewing her notes. They'll claim the insurance policy was unrelated, that the abuse was the result of mental illness or stress. What about the video evidence? Damaging, but they'll try to explain it away. Mental breakdown, misunderstood discipline, anything to avoid premeditated murder charges. Cullen leaned back in his chair. What do you need from me? Your testimony about the custody battle, the systematic isolation, the pattern of lies. We need to establish that this was planned from the beginning. And Wyatt, he's been working with the child psychologist. Dr. Martinez thinks he's ready to testify, but we'll keep it brief. He's still having nightmares. That's normal. The important thing is that he's safe now, and he's getting the help he needs. Walsh pulled out a thick file. We've also uncovered additional evidence. Financial records showing payments to witnesses, correspondence with Dr. Everett about falsifying medical reports, even communications with CPS workers who were taking bribes. How many people were involved? At least 7. Dr. Everett, 2 CPS workers, 3 witnesses who provided false testimony, and a court clerk who helped expedite the custody arrangements. They're all being prosecuted. Yes, conspiracy charges across the board. Cullen felt a grim satisfaction. The web of corruption that had stolen 3 years of his son's life was finally being exposed. What about Rhett and Verna's lawyers? They're pushing for a plea deal. Their clients are willing to plead guilty to child endangerment in exchange for dropping the murder charges. No, Cullen, no deals. They plan to kill my son for money. They don't get to negotiate their way out of this. Walsh nodded. Understand. But you should know that going to trial means reliving all of this. For you and for Wyatt. Wyatt deserves justice. Real justice, not some backroom deal that lets them serve 5 years and walk free. All right, then we go to trial. That afternoon, Cullen met with Wyatt and Dr. Martinez at the child psychologist's office. The boy had gained weight, his color had returned, and he was sleeping through the night. But the psychological scars would take longer to heal. How are you feeling about testifying? Dr. Martinez asked. Scared, Wyatt admitted. But Dad says it's important. It is important, but you only have to tell the truth about what happened. No one can hurt you anymore. Well, if I forget something, that's okay. Just tell them what you remember. Cullen knelt beside his son's chair. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but then they might not go to jail. They're going to jail either way. The evidence is too strong. But you said my testimony could help make sure they stay in jail. It could. But your safety and happiness are more important than any trial. Wyatt thought about this for a long moment. I want to tell them what happened, so other kids don't get hurt. Dr. Martinez smiled. That's very brave. Will you be there, Dad? I'll be right there. The whole time. That evening, Cullen received a call from Jordy. I've got more bad news for the defense. Found another laptop in Verna's office. What's on it? Communications with a life insurance investigator. They were planning to claim Wyatt died from a pre-existing medical condition. Had the whole story worked out rare genetic disorder, undiagnosed until it was too late. They thought of everything. Everything except getting caught. The investigator is cooperating fully. He thought he was helping with a legitimate claim review. How many people did they corrupt? We're up to 12 now. This was a massive conspiracy, Cullen. They were planning to bilk the insurance company, destroy your reputation, and murder your son. All for $500,000. When do we present this to the jury? Next week. Trial starts Monday. The trial began on a cold Montana morning. The courthouse was packed with media, family members, and curious onlookers. Cullen sat in the front row with Wyatt, who would testify later in the week. Judge Harrison called the court to order. This is the matter of the state of Montana versus Rhett McAllister and Verna McAllister. Are the defendants ready to proceed? Both women sat at the defense table, looking smaller than Cullen remembered. Prison uniforms had replaced their designer clothes, and the stress of the past month showed in their faces. Ready, Your Honor, said their lead attorney, Marcus Webb. The state is ready, Your Honor, Walsh replied. The opening statements laid out the case in stark terms. Walsh painted a picture of systematic abuse, calculated murder, and breathtaking betrayal. Webb argued for mental illness, claiming his clients were overwhelmed by the stress of caring for a troubled child. The evidence will show, Walsh said, that these defendants conspired to murder Wyatt Harwood for insurance money. They isolated him from his father, fabricated evidence of abuse, and then slowly starved him to death in a locked room. Webb's response was predictable. My clients are not monsters. They are two women who made mistakes under extreme pressure. What happened to Wyatt was tragic, but it was not premeditated murder. The first witness was Dr. Reynolds, who testified about Wyatt's condition when he arrived at the hospital. In my 15 years of practice, I've never seen a case of malnutrition this severe in a child who was supposedly receiving care, she said. Another day, maybe two, and we would have been talking about organ failure. In your professional opinion, was this the result of neglect or deliberate starvation? Deliberate starvation. The pattern of weight loss, the dehydration, the psychological trauma, this was systematic abuse. Webb's cross-examination focused on the possibility of eating disorders or medical conditions that could explain Wyatt's condition. Isn't it possible that the child had an undiagnosed condition that caused him to lose weight despite adequate nutrition? No. The medical tests were conclusive. This was starvation, pure and simple. The second day brought testimony from the CPS workers who had been bribed to close investigations. Their admissions were damning. Mrs. McAllister offered me $5,000 to classify the reports as unfounded, testified caseworker Linda Chun. She said it was just a vindictive ex-husband trying to cause trouble. Did you investigate the claims? Not thoroughly. Mrs. McAllister was very convincing, very authoritative. And the money, I needed the money. What changed your mind about cooperating with this investigation? When I saw the video footage of what they did to that boy, I realized I had helped them nearly kill a child. The third day was the hardest. Jordy presented the digital evidence emails, audio recordings, video files that showed the systematic abuse in horrifying detail. The courtroom was silent as Verna's voice played through the speakers. Drink slow, Wyatt. You don't want to throw up again. Remember, you're a bad boy when Daddy's around. Several jurors looked away when the video showed Wyatt rationing his meager food, making each bite last as long as possible. How many of these recordings did you recover? Walsh asked. Over 40 hours of audio and video. The defendants recorded everything, apparently as evidence to use against Mr. Harwood. They never realized it would be used against them. Webb's cross-examination was weak. Isn't it possible these recordings were taken out of context? What context makes it acceptable to starve a child? Jordy replied that on the fourth day, Cullen took the stand. His testimony was methodical, controlled, focused on the facts rather than the emotion. When did you first suspect something was wrong? Walsh asked. From the beginning. The custody arrangement didn't make sense. I've been a good father, never had any problems with Wyatt. But suddenly I was limited to supervised visits, then weekend visits, then nothing. What did you do about it? I fought it. Hired lawyers, filed motions, requested reviews. But every time I challenged them, new evidence would appear. New witnesses, new medical reports, new reasons why I was unfit. Did you ever suspect the evidence was fabricated? I suspected, but I couldn't prove it. They were very good at creating plausible explanations. Webb's cross-examination was aggressive. Mr. Harwood, isn't it true that you had drinking problems during your marriage? I had a beer after work sometimes. That's not a drinking problem. Isn't it true that you were physically abusive to your wife? No, I never laid a hand on Rhett or Wyatt. But you argued with your wife, didn't you? Raise your voice. We argued about the divorce, about custody, about money. But I never abused anyone. How do we know you didn't fabricate this evidence to get revenge on your ex-wife? Cullen looked directly at the jury. Because I didn't have to. They recorded their own crimes. The fifth day brought the testimony everyone had been waiting for. Wyatt took the stand, small and pale, but determined. Doctor Martinez sat beside him as a support person. Walsh kept her questions simple, direct. Wyatt, can you tell us about living with your mother and grandmother? They were mean to me. They said Dad didn't want me anymore. Where did you sleep? In the laundry room. On a mat. Did they give you enough food? No. They said I had to earn it by being good. What did being good mean? Not talking about Dad. Not asking for food. Not crying. Were you allowed to leave the laundry room? No. They locked the door. How did that make you feel? Scared. And hungry. And sad. Webb's cross-examination was brief. Even he knew better than to attack a 9-year-old abuse victim too aggressively. Wyatt, did your mother and grandmother ever tell you they loved you? They said they loved me, but they hurt me. Do you miss them? No. I don't want to see them again. The final witness was Verna herself. Against her lawyer's advice, she had insisted on testifying. Mrs. McAllister, did you conspire to murder your grandson? Of course not. I loved Wyatt. Everything I did was for his own good. What about the insurance policy? That was just prudent financial planning. Cullen wasn't providing adequate support. And the recorded conversations where you discussed starving him. Those were taken out of context. I was trying to teach him discipline. By locking him in a room without food, he was a troubled child. He needed structure. Walsh's cross-examination was devastating. Mrs. McAllister, you purchased a life insurance policy on Wyatt and then proceeded to starve him. How is that not attempted murder? I never intended to hurt him. But you did hurt him. You nearly killed him. I was trying to help him. Help him by telling him his father didn't want him. Cullen was an unfit parent. Based on evidence you fabricated, I didn't fabricate anything. Walsh played one of the audio recordings. Don't eat it all today. You need to stay weak. We're almost done. What did you mean by we're almost done? Verna's composure finally cracked. I meant, I mean, we were almost done with the discipline. You meant you were almost done killing him. No. Then explain to the jury why you were planning to leave the country after collecting the insurance money. Verna had no answer. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with the verdict. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Verna McAllister, guilty. Verna's face went white. She gripped the defense table as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Rhett McAllister, guilty. Rhett began to cry, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd done. The jury found both women guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, child endangerment, fraud, perjury, custodial interference. 2 weeks later, they returned for sentencing. Judge Harrison was thorough, methodical, and merciless. Mrs. McAllister, he said, addressing Verna first, you orchestrated a campaign of abuse and manipulation that nearly resulted in the death of an innocent child. You corrupted the legal system, bribed public officials, and showed no remorse for your actions. I sentence you to 25 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 years. Verna stood stoically, accepting her fate without visible emotion. Mrs. McAllister, he said, turning to Rhett, you participated willingly in the abuse of your own son. You locked him in a room, starved him, and told him his father didn't want him. You betrayed the most fundamental trust between parent and child. I sentence you to 18 years in prison, without possibility of parole. Rhett collapsed in his sobs, finally understanding that her choices had consequences as they were led away. Cullen felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. Justice had been served, but the damage to Wyatt could never be fully repaired. 6 months later, Cullen and Wyatt stood outside a small cabin in the mountains outside Livingston, Montana. The moving truck had just left, and their new life was beginning. It's nice, Dad, Wyatt said, looking at the cabin with its wide porch and mountain views. It's ours, Cullen replied. Nobody can take it away from us. The cabin was simple but comfortable. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room with a stone fireplace. Wyatt had chosen the room with the best view of the mountains. Can I have a dog? Wyatt asked as they unpacked boxes. If you want one, I want one. A big one that can protect us. We don't need protection anymore. But we can get a dog because we want one. Wyatt smiled, the first genuine smile Cullen had seen from him in months. Geordie arrived that afternoon with a truck full of furniture and a bottle of whiskey to celebrate. He'd become Wyatt's unofficial uncle, the man who'd helped expose the conspiracy and bring the criminals to justice. How's the boy doing? He asked as they watched Wyatt explore the property. Better. Therapy is helping. He's sleeping through the night now. And you? I'm fine. We're both fine. You sure? You've been through hell. Cullen watched his son chase a butterfly across the meadow behind the cabin. Hell's over. This is the other side. That evening, they built their first fire in the stone fireplace. Wyatt sat on the floor, playing with a toy truck while Cullen read the newspaper. Dad, yeah, are we safe now? Now? Yeah, they'll never touch you again. Promise? I promise. Wyatt returned to his toy, satisfied with the answer. Outside, the mountains stood guard over their new life, and the future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten book. Justice hadn't just been done, it had been designed, executed, and was now permanent. The guilty were behind bars, the innocent were safe, and the truth had finally set them free.